Welcome to Trust Talk. Today's guest is Charles Green. He is co-author of the seminal book, The Trusted Advisor, now celebrating its 20th anniversary. He talks about the paradoxes, the shift from trust as personal attribute to reputation and branding, and whether getting real connection is made harder using on-screen connectivity tools. He reflects on the trust equation and whether that has changed over the last 20 years, and the most powerful component, intimacy, and professionals should use that more often. Your host today, Severin DeWitt.
Charlie, welcome at Trust Talk, the podcast on trust.
Thank you, Severin. Thank you for having me here today.
You are the first and foremost known as the co-author of the iconic book celebrating, I think, this year's 20th anniversary since it was first published. It's called The Trusted Advisor.
That's right.
Charlie, was it serendipity or a sheer flash of genius that brought you together with David Meister and Robert Galford to write the book, The Trusted Advisor?
Well, it was kind of lucky. I fell into it. I had been a general management consultant for 20 years, and then I got involved. I left that and was doing some just contract training, and I knew somebody in the Faculty of Marketing at Columbia Business School. He got involved in a long training development program for Deloitte and Touche, and they needed some consultants in addition to academics. So I got put onto that team, and then like the very beginning of the project, some professor missed an airplane, and the client said, "We have a half an hour free. Can you guys throw together something on the idea of a trusted advisor?" And my partner and I said, "Sure, we'll come up with something." And we did a half an hour and it went well. And he said, "Gee, that's, can you make it an hour next time?" "Sure, we'll do that," and eventually it became a book. And in the rearview mirror, I realized a lot of what I had done was relevant and made sense, but I hadn't gone looking for it. It was a little bit serendipitous.
Interesting story, yeah. Things like that do happen. I can't remember there was a particular reason why my interest of trust occurred. It was just, it fascinated me that there's almost no day that passes that either in the newspaper, on television, or on social media, some way, trust is an issue.
Yeah, that's true. And I think even more so than it was 20 years ago.
You asked me about some future podcasts. Well, soon I will have an interview on trust and the judiciary.
That's even more, that's the most interesting one you mentioned to me. The connection between the law and justice on the one hand and trust. I wrote a blog post a couple of years ago about a line from a Bob Dylan song. And the line was something to the effect of, "You must live outside the law to be something virtuous. You must live outside the law." And I think what he meant was that if your moral guidance, your sense of justice is completely to the letter of the law, I don't trust you, because that's just a construct. There has to be something deeper than that, some set of bedrock principles or beliefs or integrity that grounds you in it. No, I don't know what the line was. It was, "To live outside the law, you must be honest."
So before we go into things, what is it that you do these days?
Well, I think like you, I recently retired or semi-retired. I now am about 25-30% busy. I still have one big client, and I have more time to do things like this. But other than that, I'm playing a lot of golf. I live in Florida, so it's easy to go to the beach. I'm just enjoying doing not very much.
That's good, especially if you have reached an age where you have done already so much.
Yeah.
It's time to relax,
Close
right?
enough. That's right.
There is no escaping from asking you many questions about the book. But before we do that, have you personally gained new insights over the last 20 years on what role trust played in your own life?
Yes, when I started, it was a new, interesting subject matter for me, and I was intellectually curious about it, loved exploring it. And I guess the one thing I've learned over 20 years is that somewhere along the line, I began to really believe in all these things, and I began to practice some of these ideas in my own business. I founded a small, dozen people consulting training firm on helping professional service firms learn to be more trusted and trustworthy. And I began to practice a lot of these things around business development, around contracts, and it has had a profound impact on the way that I ran the business. I'm very pleased with it. I mean, for example, business development, I think if you really explore the idea of trust, you get to the point where you say the purpose of sales is not to get the sale. It is to help the client. And if you do that, if you behave that way, if you believe that, you end up making more sales. So it's one of many paradoxes in the area of trust. You know, the best way to sell is stop trying to sell. Instead, serve the client. And guess what? Enough people reciprocate that it's more effective than if you were trying to tweak every little transaction and so forth. So,
Charlie, it's very interesting that you say that, because we had an interview in Trust Talk with a professor of marketing, Kent Grayson, and he just said that, exactly that. Pushing products have no eye for the customer, and just to push the product to the customer is really not what builds trust.
Totally correct. It destroys trust, and that doesn't help sales at all. But the challenge is to, for example, when you're faced with $1 million contract or whatever is big for you, you know, to be able to say, you know what, I don't think you're the right client for this. You should talk to my competitor. You know, and if you can get to that point mentally where you're willing to recommend a competitor because they're better for that client, then you really understand what it means to be client focused. And by the way, if you do that, you will create a new client for life, because they'll say, wow, you're willing to do that? Yes, good. When I need what you have, I know I'm coming back.
And giving up self-interest.
Exactly.
For the interest of the clients.
That's right.
We come to that when we later we'll talk about the role of lawyers and trust, right?
Okay, good, yes. That'll be fun.
When you wrote a book in 2000 with your colleagues, trust was seen as a personal and a psychological attribute to building relationships and giving advice effectively.
Yes.
Now, many years later, it seems to me it has shifted towards a more social or institutional concept. What do you think?
I think that's an accurate statement about the proportion of discussion focused on personal trust versus institutional trust. I think you're right. You see more about social and institutional trust. They've always been there. They're kind of separable concepts. In my own work, in the book, The Trusted Advisor, is about 100% focused on interpersonal trust. And not so much on social institutional. And we kind of re-examined that thought in the 20th anniversary edition of The Trusted Advisor, which just came out. And we sort of doubled down and said, no, that's still mainly what we're talking about. I think that we do use the word trust to describe both of those phenomena, but they're a little bit different. I think that the social institutional trust, first of all, it's weaker. It's a weaker form. So I say, for example, well, do I trust Amazon? Sure, I trust Amazon to deliver packages. Do I trust Amazon to babysit my grandson? No. You know, maybe I trust the driver, but not because he comes from Amazon. So I think that the factors that determine institutional trust are things like brand, reputation, some of the more rational components of trustworthiness like credibility, reliability. But once you get into some of the more emotional components, what we call intimacy or security or vulnerability, those are traits that we only associate with other human beings. So I think that when you talk about interpersonal trust, it's a broader array of phenomena that come to bear. When you talk about institutional trust, it's more like reputation and branding. It's a proper use of the word, but it's a different intentionality.
Yeah, following up on your example about Amazon, the growing importance and capabilities of technologies have made it more of a challenge to make connection with someone. Yes, we have social media, we have LinkedIn, Amazon, Zoom. It has been made really easy to get technically connected to people all over the world. Yet it feels like getting real connection is more difficult. What's your take on that?
Well, I'm beginning to disagree with that. The more we go through this, pandemic, Zoom era, whatever you want to call it, I think what I see, people getting more and more adept at using these remote tools. I don't think we're going to flip back to, quote, normal after the pandemic's over. I think a lot of the things we're learning are going to stay there. I notice people, I deliver a lot of my stuff recently, through Zoom and video and so forth. And if you watch cable news people here in the States, the rules are beginning to change. The rules used to say, if you're going to be on video, wear a nice shirt and tie, get a generic background. No, what we're finding more and more is people are interested. What's that book on his bookshelf? I think I've read that. Or how come there's bananas in that bowl today? I thought yesterday it was apples. What's going on? What kind of place do they live in?
Right.
And you mentioned LinkedIn. Digital marketers are nuts. They look at all this great data and they think, oh, these are the people we'll target. And then what do? They write a generic piece of spam email and send it out. There's a gold mine of interpersonal information there. All you have to do, take a few minutes and look on that LinkedIn profile before you have a phone call and say, gee, I noticed it was snowing in Amsterdam last night, really a lot. Did you get stuck in that snowstorm? How was it? Are you guys able to skate again? How exciting. You've made it personal. And the fact is, the guy the other day lives 20 miles from here. We haven't met. He said, maybe we could meet up for coffee. Meeting somebody for coffee 20 miles away, it's half a day, it's quite a bit. And but on Zoom, it's 35 minutes. So there's a lot of advantages, and I think people are going to get more adept at making those personal connections through remote technology. So I'm kind of optimistic about it.
I guess your name and that of your co-authors, David Meister and Robert Galford, will always be connected to the trust equation. In what sense has the equation changed over the years, and is it still relevant in 2021?
The quick answer, it hasn't changed, and yes, it's still relevant. In fact, if anything, it's more relevant because, as you pointed out, a lot of the interactions we have with clients, potential clients, is remote or purely digital, no direct interaction. But human beings have not changed in the last 50 years. We are the results of eons of evolution, and we're still we have common sense, we have intuitions, we have emotions. Those things have not gone away. So the portion of the interactions that involve that full emotional bandwidth, they may have reduced, but the impact of them, if anything, is increased because there's that much less interaction to leverage it. We still want to, you don't spend $1 million on a law firm without meeting some people and getting a sense of who they are and what it's going to be like to work with them. And if you have, 20 minutes of interaction as opposed to 2 hours, the weight put on that 20 minutes is higher, not lower. So the dynamics of it, I'm being convinced that over the years, we saw it apply in China, Romania, France, Texas even. It's still a good model.
For those who have forgotten about the book or have never read it, I can't imagine there are any, but you describe the stages in the trust process as, quote, the ability to engage, listen, frame, envision, and commit.
Yeah.
In current times, how does a trusted advisor look like who is capable of all this?
Well, the process you describe, I think, is still fundamentally the same. It's a human process, but I think if it's changed at all, and I've come to view it a little bit differently, the importance of listening is hard to overstate, and maybe that's gotten bigger. One of the fastest, deepest keys to creating trust is a feeling that other person that I'm talking to actually seems to care about me. They're interested in me. They're curious. They're paying attention to me. And we've all felt if you're talking to someone and they're nodding their head, they're not really listening to you. They're going through a mechanical checklist. We don't trust those people. On the other hand, somebody who listens to what you say, nods their head and says, oh, that's interesting. So that would mean this, yeah? They're paying attention. They're interested. And we rate that very highly. So I think particularly in the more remote times that we're coming up, the importance of that listening step is, if anything, maybe even bigger.
Yeah. So listening, in your view, is a profound method of getting trust.
Yes. I couldn't say it better. It is a profound method of getting trust. It validates the other person. It shows that I am treating them as an end, not as a means to my ends.
Let's talk a little bit about the legal profession, the profession I'm coming from.
Yes.
I was an attorney myself, and what I noticed from my time as an attorney is that most lawyers I don't know about other professions, but certainly I noticed it with the lawyers, find that content is what creates trust with the client. And all the rest is...
Well, in my experience, that's an accurate description of what lawyers believe, and they are wrong. One of the even if you're dealing with other lawyers as a client, we turned the trust equation into a 20-question self-assessment online, and we've had over 100,000 people take it. And one of the things we found is that the most powerful component using a regression analysis is intimacy. Not credibility, not reliability, not the things that all lawyers, and by the way, it's not just lawyers, consultants believe the same thing, accountants believe the same thing, but lawyers are an extreme case. Now, if you look at surveys, Gallup organization, for example, every year does a survey of most and least trusted professions. Try this with your audience sometime. Ask them who is at the bottom of those lists, and they will tell you, and they're correct. The three names they come up with: politicians, lawyers, and used car salesmen. And they're right. They show up at the bottom. Now, you know who's at the top of the list, at least in the US, without fail, almost every single year? Nurses. Male nurses, female nurses, doesn't matter. And what is the critical skill of a nurse? I think it's what we call intimacy, that ability to connect, very personal.
But lawyers are scared of intimacy. Because
yes, they are.
It has this feeling of, I shouldn't come too close to my client, because otherwise you don't have the unprofessional, no business relation.
Yes, well, let me give you a quick example. You can try this with your lawyer friend. When you run into a client, a lawyer, and they say, don't give me that soft stuff. I'm a believer in data and good theory and don't waste time on the wishy-washy stuff. You say to them, I think I understand. What I'm hearing you say is you're a no-nonsense kind of person, right? You like just the data. You don't want to waste time on all this silly interpersonal crap. Am I right? Is that who you are? And they'll say, yes, that's who I am. Well, you just established intimacy with them by trashing the notion of intimacy. You've made a connection with them. Lawyers react just like any other people. They want, intimacy, they want connection just as much as anyone else, but they fostered this belief system. And again, they're not alone. This is also true of accountants and consultants. This belief in the meritocracy of purely rational thought. It's just not true. There was a great HBR article about 15 years ago called what was it called? Lovable Fools and Competent Jerks. And of course, we'd all like a lovable, competent person, but if you have to choose, which do you choose? An incompetent, great person or a really competent jerk? Well, most people will tell you, I'll take the competent jerk, thank you. I can deal with the interpersonal stuff. That's not how they behave. That's what they say. That is not what they do. Anyway, we could go on about that, but you get my point.
I know you must have been asked this question numerous times, but I'll try it again. Where is trust heading in the near future?
Well, probably down, probably not in a good direction. I think all the stuff that you see in the press is true. Certainly it's true, I think, on the institutional trust side of things. Edelman Trust Barometer, for example, documents this very well. It's all kind of heading down. It's not good. And that's probably true on the interpersonal side as well. It varies with culture. The Scandinavian countries are notorious for having high trust levels. In general, down, I think.
Right. You talked about the Edelman 2021 Trust Barometer.
Yeah.
And I think they found that there is a growing trust gap, as they call it, between the informed and the uninformed. Don't you think that is a little worrisome, that trust is eroding?
Well, it is, but let's remember, the Edelman Trust Barometer is something, I think this is the 22nd year they've been doing it. They are a PR firm, and this is a fabulous piece of PR. It gets Richard Edelman invited to the Davos conference every year to announce the new thing. So, and every year they have to have a headline. Well, this year it's the informed and the uninformed. Last year it was economic inequality, and that drives distrust. The year before that, it was people that like your employers, as opposed to NGOs or government or business. The year before that, I think it was media has become the least trusted for the first time. So it's all sort of true. To me, the big headline is it's generally headed down. And that is worrisome. I agree with him on that. It's a worrisome phenomenon.
But you are an optimist by nature.
Yeah, I am. Again, I tend to, maybe because I focus so much on interpersonal trust. Stephen Covey had a beautiful little story about a man and a child walking along a beach, and there had been a big storm, and all these starfish had been thrown up onto the beach. And the child was taking one starfish, he'd throw it back in the ocean. He'd pick up another starfish, throw it back in the ocean. And the adult said to the child, there's a lot of starfish, it's not making much difference. And the kid throws another starfish in and said, it made a difference to that one. And that's how I look at it. If you can increase trust with one person you interact with, that's good. How much can you do?
That's a fantastic closure of our interview, Charlie. Thank you very much for being our guest today.
Thank you, Severin. It's a pleasure.
Wish you all the best in Florida.
Thank you so much. Have a great rest of the day yourself.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Trust Talk. We would be very grateful if you leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or on Stitcher. Don't miss out on future travels around trust and subscribe to this channel or visit us on our website, trusttalk.co, or on Twitter @TrustTalkCO. We look forward to seeing you again.